You are the world's worst marriage guidance counselor. What advice do you give? Also, doing sports is hard work. Takes eating right and working out and practicing, so live vicariously through your children's athletic victories instead and make sure to get as many of them as possible, otherwise you're a loser. It doesn't matter whether that's through forcing your children to work insanely hard or berating that underage ref at your 8-year-old's soccer game. A win is a win no matter how you got it. The biggest mobsters and the one that once you married, you became her property. Your only goal in this marriage is to make sure they are always happy by meeting every one of their demands. The harder they hit you and the more bruises they leave only goes to show exactly how much they love you. Some common phrases to use are "I fell down the stairs," "I walked into the door," "I'm so clumsy," and "I tripped over something in the middle of the night." The biggest mobsters and the one that completely let yourself go both mentally and physically. Stop doing anything that contributed to self-improvement. Stop brushing your teeth regularly and wear the equivalent of a burlap sack when going outside. If your partner suggests taking care of yourself because it went past "I'm no longer attracted to you" to diabetes might take your foot this year territory, flip out. Insist that you have no obligation to them, and if they don't like it, they know where the door is. The biggest mobsters and the one that don't blame the children. Audibly, make sure to subtly hint that whatever they were doing was the cause of the fighting. Again, I cannot stress this enough. Do it so that everything they do will never be enough to keep you and your spouse together. Whatever achievement they've garnered is crap compared to what you guys think. The biggest mobsters and the one that if your wife is unwilling to perform her wife duties, set up a nice dinner table, order a chef. After dinner, welcome the very beautiful escort that you've ordered. At this point your wife might get a little angry. Ignore her. Proceed with the escort and do your absolute best. Ignore your wife or let her watch, but do not let her join. This is for you, wife, to learn about what makes a good woman. When you're done, let the escort leave and tell her, calmly, that is what happens when she does her wife duties. The biggest mobsters and the one that you can't lose an argument if you remember enough past mistakes and offenses to name one after every statement your couple makes. This also shows who is the good one in the relationship, as the one that runs out first is the one who has suffered less, so he or she deserves to lose the argument and also feel guilty and sad for their infinite pile of misbehaviors. The biggest mobsters and the one that tell the husband to always affect a sarcastic tone, complete with the self-satisfying grin, in response to any concerns or grievances that the wife brings up, and tell him to always turn everything into a debate, and to focus on calculating the best way to win the debate rather than actually listening to what she is saying. Of course, after he feels he has won the debate, he should take on a highly dismissive tone to show her that her input is no longer needed, and again, complement this with a self-satisfying grin. Half a decade of this and voila, marriage destroyed. The biggest mobsters and the one that, well, if you are having problems communicating, have you thought of having more children or seeking a sister wife who might communicate with you better? Hey, you could even get a little extra income filming that as a side hustle on TLC. Then strangers could give you feedback on your marriage every time you go online. How am I doing? The biggest mobsters and the one that. Now what you need is more opinions on the matter. Next time you get upset, I want you to go and talk to 3 different friends. The less they know your partner, the better, and then bring it up. Be sure you present the fresh new ideas as your own thoughts. That way your partner is focused on figuring out what in the hell you are talking about, rather than wasting time trying to ensure it is corrected. The biggest mobsters and the one that if your partner bans someone from your shared home due to previous actions, that means they're only allowed over when your partner is gone. They'll never know, and at least they didn't have to deal with that person. Also, if they're unseen with their family, reach out to them during big milestones in the relationship, babies, proposal, marriage, etc. so that they can share in the joy your partner is too cruel to share. The biggest mobsters in the 1000. The only thing that matters is you. Don't worry about what your partner thinks or feels. If you have an opinion, express it over theirs. Always talk over or fear, so whatever they have to say really doesn't matter. Always be self-absorbed and an attention whore, begging to be the center of attention. Never really solve a problem with your soul, just threaten to go find someone else. Don't really put any effort in at home, just run off with the boys or the girls or your ex. Be sure to be gone more without saying anything. The saw knows you will show up in a couple days. Be controlling and act like you don't trust your soul. Be sure to use the plethora of apps to do so. After the apps, question every move and then take off with friends partying or on a trip. The biggest mobsters in the 1000. Yelling is not only an opportunity to express how distraught you are, but display the emotional commitment you have to a relationship. If you're not yelling, do you even care at all? And if your partner is yelling, you can truly understand just how terribly you failed them and how much pain you've caused, so that you can do better moving forward. If they didn't care, they wouldn't yell, they would just leave. The biggest mobsters in the 1000. A simple tip for personal growth. When your partner tries to improve themselves in any way, make sure to stress their past failures and express cynicism about their current goals, to keep them grounded. Bonus tip: if they stay committed to what they are doing, be sure to sabotage them regularly through emotional manipulation. Never be direct, but make sure that they know that they are emotionally neglecting, if not abusing you, by pursuing anything outside your needs. The biggest mobsters in the 1000. Just because he hits you when he is drunk doesn't mean he is all that bad. And you yell at him, so you both do equally bad things. Relationships are all about balance, good or bad, and in this case we have the bad balance, but it's balanced so you have a healthy relationship, and I do think getting kids will make the bad balance turn into good balance. The biggest mobsters in the 1000. Tobias, Lindsay, as a therapist, I have advised a number of couples to explore an open relationship where the couple remains emotionally committed but free to explore extramarital encounters. Lindsay: well, did it work for those people? Tobias: no, it never does. I mean, these people somehow delude themselves into thinking it might, but it might work for us. The biggest mobsters in the 1000. When in private, judge and criticize everything your partner does. Make sure your criticism is inconsistent, unclear, and confusing. Contradict yourself from one day to the next, but also make sure that the criticism is harsh, personal, and nasty. If you don't do this, your partner will become comfortable with who they are, and that makes them a threat to you and your supremacy in a relationship. You must keep the upper hand at all costs. A relationship of equals will never last. When in public, praise your partner and treat them with respect and like an equal. It is important to keep up the charade, lest your partner garner the sympathy and support of others. The biggest mobsters in the 1000. Respect your partner's privacy. Show your love daily. Remind them how you feel about them, what makes them special, how much you appreciate something they did, etc. Note about gifts, about recognition for why you're still with them. When you're wrong, say so. I'm sorry, I was wrong, can have real impact when said sincerely. Give each other space. Autonomy is important. You're both individuals, not extensions of one another. Finally, spend time alone together and unplugged. Reminisce, laugh, rekindle the spark as often as you can. The biggest mobsters in the 1000. You're a strong provider. Your wife won't always want to have sex, but you provide. So should she. Either use your resources on hookers or force her. You're a strong woman who doesn't owe your man sex. He is lucky to take care of you. If you're bored of him, date some other men. You may find someone better. Remember, sex is a reward you hang over his head, nothing more. Tell them both, separately. Watch the dominoes fall. The biggest mobsters in the 1000. Take care of yourself first. If you don't know how to care of yourself, How can you possibly care for and love others? Always take the last donut. Flush the toilet at your convenience even if your spouse is in the shower. Explore where that flirtatious office relationship might lead. It will show you that you really love your spouse when you take it all the way and still choose your spouse in the end. That is proof of your love for him, her. The biggest mobsters in the 1,000. The world's worst marriage counselors are more common than you would think. There's so many who do individual therapy with one spouse. Then couples therapy with the two of them. They side with the one spouse they do individual therapy with, which is completely unethical, and sometimes even end up having an affair with them. The biggest mobsters in the 1,000. If your partner isn't happy, just get him all the material possessions you can. Cat, dog, new truck, new motorcycle, new camper, new boat, and pay all these bills yourself. If that doesn't work, move around to new states and buy him a house too. Get him a lawnmower, generator, tools, all of it. Wait on him hand and foot. He'll surely be happy then. Just say yes to everything. Trust me, he'll never leave you. The biggest mobsters in the 1,000. Set a hard line between yours and your partner's possessions, including everything from books and furniture to electronics and appliances, Netflix accounts, and especially money. You'll both value everything so much more by having exclusivity. Bonus points if you establish owner's rights on the kids too. The biggest mobsters in the 1,000. It really depends on the person. I love practical gifts. For example, the dirt. If someone takes care of that in my garden, now I don't have to. Now I have the money and the time to do things that are more fun. My husband got me theater tickets for my birthday, and I had to remind him. Half the gift is that I don't have to think about it or plan it. If I have to think and plan, I might as well do it myself. The biggest mobsters in the 1,000. It's best if I see you each individually for a session or two. During those sessions, interview them extensively about their sex lives, and if at all possible have sex with each. I can tell you have a lot of built-up sexual tension and frustration. Am I right, etc. At the next joint session, hand them both 2 detailed scorecards on their individual performances and advise them, over the screaming and recriminations, to try harder and to come back for an evaluation when they think they've improved. The biggest mobsters in the 1,000. An influential 2002 study by Matsuoka et al. Has demonstrated that, rather than the multiple independent domestications model, all maize arose from a single domestication in southern Mexico about 9,000 years ago. The study also demonstrated that the oldest surviving maize types are those of the Mexican highlands. Later, maize spread from this region over the Americas along 2 major paths. This is consistent with a model based on the archaeological record suggesting that maize diversified in the highlands of Mexico before spreading to the lowlands. The biggest mobsters in the 1,000. Your spouse is clearly seeking the attention of other potential partners by dressing the way they do. Burn all of their clothing and make them buy new clothes. Jealousy is a perfectly justifiable excuse for controlling behavior. Absolutely don't communicate with your spouse ever. They should clearly be able to read your mind since you've been together longer than 6 months. The biggest mobsters in the 1,000. You want to slowly move your assets around so your spouse doesn't know. Get a BF on the side and get to a point of a good relationship. Shift your assets to their name, then go all out with do your worst I have nothing, then take up presidency with your new partner, transfer the assets back, then drive past your ex while waving the middle finger. That'll be $860 please. The biggest mobsters in the 1,000. I'm a big believer in disdain as a way to convey to your partner the areas in which they've failed. If you don't show your contempt for their behavior, the way they dress, or load the dishwasher, or spend too much time with their loser friends, or aren't successful enough, how are they going to get better? The biggest mobsters in the 1,000. WhatsApp is a good way to communicate, especially when one of you texts way more often than the other. It's also not important to have common interests, but a common personality. Having the exact same traits won't be dull or competitive at all. Also, Wait to have children until the economy is stable. The biggest mobsters in the 1000. It's very important to win arguments, so make sure to fight with everything you have. And don't be afraid to fight dirty. Call names and hurl insults. Show massive disdain for your partner, adversary, and refuse to back down, especially if your spouse tries to walk away from the fight. After all, it's personal, and if your spouse says something that hurts you, it means hurting you was their goal. No matter the circumstances, always remember that you two are on opposite sides, and that you are alone in this. Also, don't get lost in the weeds. Remember that whatever started the argument is what the fight is really about. After you fight, try giving your spouse the silent treatment for hours, or even days, as a cooling-off period. Once you start talking again, the best way to move on is to never ever bring it up again and pretend it never happened. Getting to the root of why something made you or your spouse angry is a can of worms not worth opening, so don't bother. The biggest mobsters in the 1000. My parents were on the brink of divorce. My dad had a midlife crisis where he thought he needed to buy a motorcycle, be a bachelor and travel, and they went to see a couples therapist. About 20 minutes into the session, the lady starts saying there is no way your relationship survives, you need to give up on this. That stupid lady just about broke my mom's heart all over again. A month later, my mom gets the courage to say one last try. I booked a 1-week couples therapy retreat. It saved their marriage. It's nearly a decade later and their love and marriage is stronger than it has ever been. Anyways, that spiteful and hateful little woman on a therapist who just went on and on about how my mother wasn't woman enough for my dad. Whatever she said is the answer to this Ask Reddit. The biggest mobsters in the 1000. You must stay married for the kids' sake, no matter how bad things get. Even if it means you need to secretly sleep around to be happy, don't ever divorce, at least until the kids are 18, or better, until they are out of college, or maybe after their first post-college job starts. It doesn't matter if the kids see you fight and dislike each other all the time. It would be way worse for them if you divorced. Plus, kids bounce back. They will know you still love each other even if you don't ever show it. You don't want to model that marriages are just something you can give up on, right? Kids must have a 2-parent only, single household with the mom and a dad, or else they grow up to have mental issues and poor morality from having a bad example set for them. Kids from divorced homes all turn out to be degenerates. The biggest mobsters in the 1000. My grandfather received advice from that exact marriage counselor. This was in the late 50s or thereabouts. They had been married something like 20 years, had their 2 kids already. My grandmother was always hot-tempered, even to the point of being violent. Her outbursts were aimed at my grandfather and mother. My uncle was largely left alone, the running joke being because my mother was the favorite, and he didn't warrant the same level of attention. Over time, this had gotten worse, maybe menopause-related, but back then, medical science was at the dame's amateur stage. Despairing of other options, my grandfather, then a devout Catholic, went to a church-run camp of some sorts for men with troubled marriages. It was run by priests, who, of course, are the ideal fonts of marital advice/s. My grandfather described his delicate situation to a particularly old priest. He said, "The Bible states the man has dominion over the household as God has dominion over the earth. This is the proper order of things. If your wife will not obey you, you must take whatever means necessary to restore that order." I have found that for some women, there is no resort but to put her over your knee and spank her. Now, my grandfather had many noble characteristics, but made multiple missteps understanding the minds of women. This was a subset of a general lack of empathy. He was not mean-spirited. He simply couldn't grasp that other people had different mindsets and principles than him. As such, something like the golden rule could be problematic, because he might do something like buy a vacuum cleaner for his wife for Christmas. That was not a hypothetical example where he would love a high-end and complex but practical device. He couldn't understand his wife wanted a more personal gift, rather than a household tool. I mentioned the above, because even with his blurry grasp of interpersonal relationships, he immediately recognized this morsel of wisdom as idiotically ridiculous. As such, he mentally checked out for the remainder of the retreat. When he got home, he could barely wait to tell my grandmother of this absurd exchange, which he did, laughing throughout. Once finished, he burbled, "Can you imagine such a thing?" and roared with laughter. My grandmother, however, listened quietly and without reaction. He waited for her response, and she eventually said, "He's right, you could spank me." Reeling, utterly flummoxed, he incredulously replied with something clever like what? She reiterated, "You could spank me. You're a man, you're bigger than me, you're stronger than me, you have an athletic background that I do not. If you wanted to put me over your knee and spank me, I couldn't stop you." She left him to process the veracity of that logic for a couple seconds, then continued, "But then you could never, ever, go to sleep." The biggest mobsters in the 1,000. Women love it when you take initiative in a relationship. Who cares if you've never said 2 words to the object of your affection? Show her you care by doing research, follow her wherever she goes, learn her schedule, learn who her friends are, dig through her garbage, but most importantly let your imagination run wild. If the cops find you, make sure you show your evidence that you're in a relationship. They'll need that for court. The biggest mobsters in the 1,000. Men, anytime you're having an argument, just remind her that she's being emotional and needs to calm down. Check to see if it's that time of the month. She will appreciate your logical and rational behavior as well as your care for her health. Women, when you're having an issue, just say that you're fine. He'll figure it out on his own and be a better partner for it. It's like giving a man a fish versus teaching a man to fish.